Long before the Silk Road was formally established as a network of trade, its foundational elements were being laid across the vast and unforgiving landscape of the Eurasian steppe. The deep prehistory of this region, spanning millennia, reveals that human interaction and the exchange of materials were not a sudden development, but a slow and incremental process that began with early nomadic peoples. The earliest evidence of this proto-trade comes not from grand caravans or established routes, but from the archaeological record itself. The unexpected appearance of a foreign object far from its place of origin. For example, Neolithic sites in Siberia, dating to as early as 3000 BCE, have yielded fragments of jade and obsidian that can be geochemically traced back to sources hundreds of kilometers away in the Baikal region and Central Asia. This suggests that rudimentary exchange networks, though sporadic, were already in place. Further west, the development of metallurgy in the Bronze Age acted as a powerful catalyst for more organized movement. The demand for copper and tin, the two essential components of bronze, spurred the creation of informal trading corridors. The make-up culture in the Caucasus, for instance, developed sophisticated metallurgical techniques around 3500 BCE, and their copper artifacts have been found at distant sites across the steppe, indicating a flow of technology and raw materials. These early routes were not driven by luxury goods, but by fundamental practical needs for tools and weapons. These early networks were fragile and often dependent on the shifting alliances of tribal groups. The Neolithic period, in particular, saw the emergence of horse domestication and the invention of the wheel, two innovations that would fundamentally transform the nature of transport across the open plains. The ability to cover greater distances with animals and wheeled carts allowed for a more substantial and regular exchange of goods than had ever been possible before. Surprisingly, Han Dynasty's initial motive for opening the Silk Road was not to establish trade route, but it was a desperate military quest to acquire the most precious resource required for their further development. What was it, and why did they need it? How the Battle of Talas, a seemingly minor military engagement, was the key event that led to the transfer of Chinese papermaking technology to the West. Why were the Silk Road's caravans, the very ones that had for centuries facilitated the exchange of goods and ideas, be the main cause of Black Death's spread that nearly halved the medieval Europe's population? The archaeological record also reveals the transmission of ideas and cultural practices along these nascent trails. Burial mounds, known as kurgans, first appeared among steppe peoples in the 4th millennium BCE and spread rapidly, with similar burial practices appearing from the Black Sea to the Altai Mountains. This shared cultural element, combined with the presence of identical pottery styles and decorative motifs across a vast geographical area, suggests a degree of cultural communication that went beyond simple commerce. It was a slow and painstaking process of diffusion, with knowledge and skills being passed from one tribe to another over generations. The true prehistory of the Silk Road is therefore the story of these early interactions, a tapestry woven from the movement of nomadic herds, the search for essential resources, and the subtle, unconscious exchange of technologies, beliefs, and artistic traditions that would eventually form the foundation for a global network of trade. Just a quick announcement: if you enjoy this video so far, please subscribe to our channel, as it motivates us to bring you a new story every evening. This is the only kind request tonight, and we won't bother you with it anymore until the very end of today's story. Let's get back to the video. The nascent Eurasian trade corridors were soon shaped and defined by the rise of a new force, the mounted nomadic peoples of the steppe. These groups, fundamentally adapted to a life of mobility, became the dynamic agents of exchange, connecting the disparate worlds of sedentary civilizations. Chief among them in the western and central parts of the steppe were the Scythians, a collection of nomadic tribes who dominated a vast territory from the Black Sea to Central Asia during the first millennium BCE. Their military strength, rooted in their mastery of mounted archery, gave them political control over the very lands through which trade would flow. Instead of settled cities, their power was centered on their mobility and their intricate social structure, which facilitated the movement of goods over immense distances. Greek sources, such as those by Herodotus, provide detailed accounts of their interactions, noting their trade in gold, grain, and furs with the colonies along the Black Sea coast. The unique animal style of their portable art, featuring stylized depictions of stags, eagles, and panthers, has been found in archaeological sites from the Pazyryk culture in the Altai Mountains to the Danube River, serving as a powerful testament to their cultural reach. In the east, a formidable confederacy known as the Xiongnu emerged to play a similarly crucial role in the development of the eastern trade routes. Based in present-day Mongolia, the Xiongnu established a powerful state that directly challenged the Han Dynasty of China. While often engaged in conflict, their very presence created a political reality that required diplomatic and commercial relations. The Xiongnu controlled the strategic oases and passes that led to China's western borders. Their leaders, known as the Chanyu, managed a complex system of tributary relations and military alliances. The flow of silk, lacquerware, and iron from China to the Xiongnu, often as part of diplomatic gifts or treaties, formed a significant early segment of the Silk Road's eastern link. These early interactions were a far cry from peaceful commerce. They were a complex blend of warfare, tribute, and intermittent trade that nonetheless established the initial pathways for the exchange of goods. The nomadic groups of the steppe were not merely passive participants or dangerous bandits. They were the essential intermediaries. Their intimate knowledge of the terrain, their ability to organize long-distance expeditions, and their political control over vast territories made them indispensable to the overland exchange of goods. They were the connectors who enabled the flow of materials between distant empires that had no direct contact with one another. Their encampments became informal marketplaces where different peoples could meet and trade, and their military dominance ensured that these routes, while dangerous, were navigable. In this way, the Scythians, Xiongnu, and others created the crucial social and political foundation upon which the great transcontinental network would eventually be built. The scattered trade of the steppe began to coalesce into a more structured network with the rise of organized empires. No single power did more to lay the logistical and political groundwork for formal long-distance commerce than the Achaemenid Empire of Persia. Ruling from the 6th to the 4th century BCE, the Achaemenids created a vast, multi-ethnic state that extended from modern-day Turkey to the Indus Valley. This territorial consolidation was crucial, as it brought disparate peoples under a single administrative and legal authority for the first time. The empire's most significant contribution was the Royal Road, an engineering marvel that, while not a direct Silk Road link, established the principles of interregional connectivity and state-sponsored infrastructure that would be replicated for centuries. This road stretched for over 2,500 kilometers from Susa to Sardis, and its primary purpose was the rapid movement of official communication and military forces. However, it also served as an artery for commerce. The Achaemenid administration established a highly efficient system of way stations, fortified posts, and official messengers. Herodotus, the Greek historian, famously praised the speed of the Persian couriers, noting that no force of nature could stop their delivery. This infrastructure, while initially for official use, created a secure and predictable environment for merchants. They no longer had to navigate a patchwork of independent, and often hostile territories. Instead, they could rely on a common currency, standardized weights and measures, and the legal framework of the Persian Empire. This allowed trade to flourish and goods to move with a speed and regularity previously unheard of. The Achaemenid Empire's system also influenced neighboring powers, including the nomadic peoples to its north and east. The Persians' control over key Central Asian oases and mountain passes meant that any trade from India, Central Asia, and beyond had to pass through their territory. This gave them an unprecedented level of control over the flow of goods, allowing them to regulate, tax, and profit from the exchange. Furthermore, the immense wealth and demand generated by the Persian elite created a powerful market for luxury goods. The desire for exotic materials, spices, and precious stones spurred merchants to seek out new sources, pushing the boundaries of the known world. In this way, the Achaemenids shifted the paradigm of exchange from an opportunistic, fragmented system to a formalized, state-backed enterprise. They proved that with centralized control and robust infrastructure, long-distance trade could be both profitable and sustainable, a lesson that would not be lost on the Chinese, Roman, and later Islamic empires that would inherit and expand upon these ancient pathways. The formal opening of the Silk Road's eastern leg was not driven by commercial ambition, but by the Han Dynasty's dire military necessity. During the reign of Emperor Wu, from 141 to 87 BCE, the Han faced a constant and formidable threat from the Xiongnu Confederacy to their north. The Xiongnu, with their superior cavalry and mastery of mounted warfare, had repeatedly raided Chinese territory, draining the empire's resources and demoralizing its armies. The core of their tactical advantage lay in their horses. The Xiongnu cavalry rode strong, swift animals, far superior to the smaller, weaker breeds available to the Han. This military inferiority spurred a strategic quest for better steeds. Chinese officials referred to the coveted animals as Tian Ma, or heavenly horses. Emperor Wu's primary objective was to acquire these superior horses, believed to be found in the western regions, particularly in the Fergana Valley of modern-day Uzbekistan. This military desperation led to a series of exploratory missions into a part of the world that was largely a mystery to the Chinese court. The most famous of these was the expedition of the diplomat Zhang Qian, who was dispatched in 138 BCE with a mission to forge an alliance with the Eurasian, a nomadic people who had been driven west by the Xiongnu. Though the alliance was unsuccessful, Zhang Qian's journey proved to be of immense strategic and historical value. His travels, which lasted more than a decade, provided the Han court with the first detailed intelligence on the geography, peoples, and politics of Central Asia. He brought back reports on the advanced urban civilizations of Fergana, Sogdiana, and Bactria, and on the extensive commercial networks that already existed between them. The information Zhang Qian provided confirmed the existence of the very horses the Han desired, as well as a range of other valuable goods and technologies. His findings transformed Han policy. The quest for horses evolved into a broader strategy of establishing control over the western trade routes to secure both military resources and diplomatic leverage against the Xiongnu. The initial military incursions and the subsequent diplomatic exchanges were directly linked to this single commodity. Military expeditions were sent to Fergana to seize the heavenly horses by force, with one campaign in 104 BCE involving thousands of soldiers and an immense logistical effort. While these expeditions were costly and not always successful, they demonstrated the Han court's unwavering commitment to securing its military needs. The political and economic repercussions of these initial military and diplomatic forays were profound, setting the stage for the formal establishment of the Silk Road as a state-sponsored endeavor and permanently altering China's relationship with the Western world. The diplomatic impetus behind the Silk Road's establishment is epitomized by the travels of Zhang Qian. Dispatched in 138 BCE by Emperor Wu, his primary mission was to seek a military alliance with the Eurasian people, who had been displaced by the Xiongnu and had migrated far to the west. This objective, however, was quickly complicated. Shortly after his departure from Han territory, Zhang Qian and his companions were captured by the Xiongnu. He was held in captivity for a decade, a period during which he was compelled to live among them and even take a Xiongnu wife. This period of forced immersion in nomadic culture gave him a unique perspective and an understanding of the region's political landscape that no other Han official possessed. After 10 years, Zhang Qian seized an opportunity to escape. He resumed his journey, traveling through Central Asia with an unwavering commitment to his original mission. Though he eventually located the Yuezhi, he found they had no interest in renewing their conflict with the Xiongnu. The alliance he had been sent to forge proved impossible. However, his mission was a success in a way no one at the Han court could have predicted. His travels provided the first-hand detailed intelligence on a world previously unknown to the Chinese. He documented the urban civilizations of Fergana, with its walled cities and agricultural prosperity, Sogdiana, a central hub for trade, and Bactria, a Hellenized kingdom with its own sophisticated culture. He described products such as grapes, alfalfa, and superior horse breeds. Upon his return in 126 BCE, Zhang Qian's reports fundamentally reoriented Han foreign policy. While he had failed to secure the military alliance, his geographical and political survey of the western regions provided the crucial data needed for a new, proactive strategy. His information revealed the existence of powerful states to the west that were not under Xiongnu control, presenting opportunities for direct engagement and potential alliances. The very goods he reported on, particularly the Fergana horses, spurred a new wave of state-sponsored initiatives to establish permanent contact. Zhang Qian's journey was therefore not a military success, but an intelligence triumph that transformed Han China's worldview. It shifted the empire's focus from a defensive, reactive posture against the Xiongnu to an expansive, strategic engagement with the wider Eurasian continent, laying the informational groundwork for the trade networks that would soon follow. His mission, despite its initial failure, provided the intellectual and political foundation for the formal opening of the Silk Road. The strategic intelligence gathered by Zhang Qian catalyzed a significant shift in Han foreign policy, moving from defensive alliances to territorial and logistical expansion. The new policy centered on physically establishing control over the routes he had described. This led to a series of military campaigns and the construction of state-sponsored infrastructure, most notably the establishment of the Jade Gate, or Human Pass, and the fortified corridor that led to it. The Han military, under the direct command of Emperor Wu, began a concerted effort to push westward into the Hexi Corridor. This narrow strip of land, flanked by the Chilean Mountains and the Gobi Desert, was the only viable pathway from China proper to the western regions. It was previously under the control of the Xiongnu. The Han campaigns were not swift. They were a methodical, resource-intensive process of military conquest and colonization. Imperial forces systematically drove the Xiongnu from the corridor, securing key oases and passes. With the corridor under Han control, the government initiated a massive fortification and settlement program. Watchtowers, garrison towns, and signal beacons were built at regular intervals to ensure the security of the route against nomadic raids. This security apparatus was not merely for military purposes, it was a foundational element of a state-sponsored trade policy. The most significant of these constructions was the Jade Gate. It was not just a checkpoint, but a symbolic gateway to the West, through which all official missions, military expeditions, and state-sanctioned trade had to pass. Its name derived from the valuable jade that was beginning to flow into China from the Khotan region. The formal opening of the Jade Gate and the establishment of the Han protectorates in the western regions meant that merchants and diplomats now had a reliable, secure path under the legal and military authority of the Han Empire. This was a profound change from the fragmented, ad hoc networks that had existed before. The Han state provided protection, way stations, and a predictable legal environment. This governmental support transformed what had been a perilous and infrequent undertaking into a regularized system of commerce. The flow of goods was no longer solely a matter of tribute or opportunistic exchange. It was now a matter of state policy and imperial interest. The eastward movement of horses, grapes, and other commodities, and the westward movement of silk and lacquerware began to occur on a scale previously unknown. This systematic control and infrastructure development, culminating in the opening of the Jade Gate, formally linked Han China to the nascent global network of trade and marked the true beginning of the Silk Road as a unified transcontinental route. While the Han dynasty's motives for opening the eastern trade routes were largely military, the engine that drove the western half of the Silk Road was the insatiable Roman demand for a single commodity, silk. This luxury fabric, valued for its luster and softness, captivated the Roman elite. The earliest reliable Roman accounts of silk date to the 1st century BCE, with its use becoming widespread among the wealthy during the imperial period. The fabric was a powerful symbol of status and affluence. Its use was so extravagant that Roman historians such as Seneca the Younger lamented its frivolousness. An Emperor Tiberius issued a decree in 14 CE attempting to curb its use by men. The Roman Empire's quest for silk was unique in its economic imbalance. Unlike the Han, whose interest in the West was pragmatic and strategic, the Romans had no direct political or military objectives in Central Asia or China. Their connection was purely commercial, and it resulted in a massive outflow of Roman gold and silver. Pliny the Elder, writing in the 1st century CE, famously complained that the empire was draining its wealth to purchase luxuries from the East. He estimated that 100 million sesterces were being spent annually, a considerable portion of which went to acquire silk. This economic flow was a key driver of the transcontinental trade. The Romans did not trade directly with China. Instead, they relied on a series of middlemen who controlled the route's various segments. The Parthians, and later the Sasanians, who held dominion over Persia, were the primary intermediaries. They acted as a vital and often belligerent buffer state, ensuring that the silk trade, though lucrative for them, was always conducted on their terms. This led to a complex, indirect trade system where goods and payments were exchanged multiple times before reaching their final destination. The Roman goods that flowed eastward in return were primarily gold coins, glassware, and fine textiles, but the value of these was consistently outweighed by the Roman appetite for silk. The Roman fascination with silk extended to its mythical origins. Roman writers were aware that silk came from a people known as the Seres, a term that likely referred to the Han Chinese, but their understanding of its production was vague and often fantastical. They believed the silk was harvested from trees or plants, a testament to the fact that the secret of sericulture remained a jealously guarded monopoly of the Chinese for centuries. This lack of knowledge only heightened the fabric's exotic appeal. The immense economic power of the Roman market created a continuous and powerful pull on the trade networks of the Eurasian landmass, cementing silk's role as the quintessential commodity of the road and fundamentally shaping the flow of goods, wealth, and people for centuries to come. The vast expanse of the early Silk Road was not a single continuous route, but a series of interconnected segments controlled by various political powers. The most critical and influential of these was the Parthian Empire 247 BCE, 224 CE. Geographically positioned between the Roman world and the trade routes of Central Asia, Parthia became the essential and often contentious intermediary. Their strategic location meant that virtually all goods, information, and people traveling between the east and west had to traverse their territory. The Parthians had no interest in seeing the major powers of the Roman and Han empires establish direct contact. Their control over the trans-Eurasian trade was a cornerstone of their economy and a vital source of political power. As such, they cultivated a policy of deliberate obfuscation regarding the origins of the goods that passed through their lands. They strictly limited direct contact between Roman and Chinese merchants, forcing all exchanges to occur at designated border points. This practice allowed them to monopolize the flow of luxury goods, particularly silk, and impose significant taxes on all transactions. The wealth they accumulated from this trade was immense, funding their military and enabling them to sustain a powerful empire that consistently challenged Roman expansion. The Parthians' role was not merely economic, it was also a complex diplomatic and military balancing act. Roman attempts to bypass Parthian control, such as the ambitious but failed campaigns of Marcus Licinius Crassus in 53 BCE, met with decisive military resistance. The Parthian military, with its legendary cataphract chiefly armoured cavalry and skilled mounted archers, proved to be a formidable adversary that successfully defended its territorial integrity and its lucrative trade monopoly. For the Romans, this meant that their desire for silk could only be sated through a system of indirect trade conducted on Parthian terms. Furthermore, the Parthians served as a conduit for more than just goods. They facilitated a limited exchange of ideas and technologies, though this was secondary to their commercial interests. The Parthian period saw the transmission of Greco-Roman artistic styles into Central Asia, and some Chinese innovations, such as silk processing techniques, may have made their way westward through their territories. However, it was their role as a barrier to direct contact that defined them. They were the gatekeepers of the ancient world's most valuable commercial highway, ensuring that for centuries the flow of goods was managed by a complex and often hostile network of middlemen, a system that would only be fundamentally altered with the rise of their Sasanian successors. The overland Silk Road, while iconic, was not the only channel for trans-Eurasian exchange. A parallel and equally vital network developed across the maritime expanse of the Indian Ocean and the Red Sea. This oceanic trade, driven primarily by the demand for spices, incense, and other bulk goods, complemented the terrestrial routes. It offered an alternative that bypassed the geopolitical choke points of Central Asia and the Parthian Empire, providing a different set of challenges and opportunities for merchants and empires alike. This maritime network had its own distinct advantages. While overland caravans were limited by the weight and bulk of goods they could carry, ships could transport massive quantities of commodities like pepper, cinnamon, and frankincense. The scale of this trade allowed for lower prices per unit, making these goods more accessible to a wider consumer base in the Roman world. The flow of commerce was governed by the monsoon winds, a predictable meteorological pattern that allowed sailors to make round trips between the Arabian Peninsula, India, and East Africa with relative reliability. The knowledge of these winds, documented in Greek and Roman texts like the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, was a key factor in the network's success. The Indian Ocean trade connected a diverse array of coastal powers. Indian kingdoms along the Malabar coast controlled the supply of spices, while Arab merchants dominated the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden routes. Roman traders, operating from Egyptian ports, would sail to these hubs, exchanging Roman gold and silver for the highly sought-after goods. Unlike the fragmented overland route, this maritime network was characterized by a more direct and systematic exchange, with major ports serving as centralized emporiums. Roman glassware and wine from the Mediterranean, for instance, have been found at archaeological sites in India, testifying to a robust commercial relationship. This oceanic network was not without its own political dynamics. The Kingdom of Aksum in modern-day Ethiopia and Eritrea, for example, rose to power by controlling key ports on the Red Sea, effectively becoming the gatekeepers to the Mediterranean. They managed a complex tributary and military system, profiting immensely from their strategic location. The maritime trade also facilitated a more fluid and widespread cultural exchange. Indian religious traditions and artistic styles traveled west, while Greco-Roman influences penetrated deep into coastal communities in East Africa and South Asia. The development of these sea-based routes provided a resilient and powerful alternative to the terrestrial Silk Road. It ensured that even as land-based politics and conflicts waxed and waned, the global exchange of goods and ideas continued unabated. The fragmentation of Central Asian territories was fundamentally altered by the rise of the Kushan Empire, a political entity that emerged as a major facilitator of transcontinental exchange. Descended from the Yuezhi people, who had been displaced from China's western borders, the Kushans established a powerful state that at its peak encompassed a vast territory, including parts of modern-day Afghanistan, Pakistan, and northern India. Their dominion, which lasted from roughly the 1st to the 3rd century CE, was crucial as it brought a previously fractured region under a single unified authority. The Kushans' geographical location was ideal for their role as a central hub. They controlled the passes and routes that connected the Indian subcontinent with the Central Asian steppe and, by extension, the routes leading to both Han China and the Parthian Empire. This enabled them to act as a crucial commercial bridge between the major civilizations of the East and West. Unlike the Parthians, who deliberately limited direct contact, the Kushans actively encouraged and profited from the flow of goods and ideas through their territory. They minted their own gold and copper coinage, which was widely accepted across their domain, simplifying commercial transactions and stabilizing the regional economy. Roman gold coins have been found in abundance at Kushan archaeological sites, a testament to the scale of this trade. The Kushan Empire's cultural impact was as significant as its economic role. Their embrace of diverse traditions led to the flourishing of a unique hybrid culture. Kushan rulers, such as Kanishka the Great, were patrons of both Buddhism and Hellenistic art. This synthesis gave rise to the Greco-Buddhist artistic style, which integrated classical sculptural forms with Buddhist iconography. This art form, evident in the statues and reliefs found in the Gandhara region, traveled along the Silk Road, influencing artistic styles in China and beyond. The Kushans also played a pivotal role in the transmission of Buddhism into China. Monks and missionaries traveled east from Kushan territory, carrying scriptures and teachings that would lead to the widespread adoption of the faith in East Asia. The Kushan Empire's stability and cosmopolitan nature created an environment where merchants, monks, and scholars could travel safely and interact freely. Their political and economic influence was not a barrier but a catalyst, enabling an unprecedented level of exchange that enriched all civilizations connected by the road. In this way, the Kushans transformed a series of dangerous trails into a genuine bridge between the world's major cultures. The transcontinental journey was defined by a series of geographic and logistical obstacles, with none more formidable than the Taklamakan Desert. Known as the Sea of Death for its arid conditions and shifting sands, this vast expanse required a sophisticated system of support to be traversed. The successful navigation of this region was made possible by the development of a chain of fortified rest stops and supply depots known as caravansaries. These structures were not mere inns. They were a vital part of the trade infrastructure, providing a lifeline for merchants, animals, and goods. A typical caravansary was a walled compound, built to withstand both the elements and potential bandit attacks. Its core layout included a large central courtyard where camels and other pack animals could be rested and watered. Surrounding the courtyard were a series of rooms and stalls, providing shelter for merchants and storage for their goods. These facilities were often equipped with wells or cisterns to provide fresh water, a critical resource in a desert environment where water sources were few and far between. The walls were constructed of packed earth or mud brick, often several meters thick, providing insulation from the extreme temperatures of the desert, which could swing dramatically from day to night. The placement of these caravansaries was a matter of meticulous calculation. Situated at a distance of a day's journey from one another, roughly 20 to 30 kilometers apart. This strategic spacing ensured that a caravan, no matter its size, could reach a secure haven before nightfall. The administration of these posts varied by region and era, but they were often maintained by a local ruler or a powerful merchant guild. The oasis towns of the Tarim Basin like Kashgar, Yarkand, and Khotan were the main hubs from which these networks radiated. These towns served not only as major centers of trade, but also as logistical command centers for the caravansaries, providing security forces, supplies, and administrative oversight. The caravansaries were more than just logistical stops. They were also a vibrant cultural and informational nexus. Merchants from diverse backgrounds, Sogdians, Bactrians, Han Chinese would converge at these points, exchanging news, discussing market conditions, and forging new commercial connections. This continuous flow of information, in addition to goods, was essential to the functioning of the trade network. The arduous journey and the reliance on these fortified outposts shaped the economics of the Silk Road, making long-distance trade a high-risk, high-reward enterprise. The investment in camels, supplies, and security was substantial, but the potential profits from a successful passage were immense. Without the disciplined infrastructure of the caravansaries, the Taklamakan Desert would have been an impenetrable barrier, and the overland trade between east and west would have been impossible on any significant scale. The exchange along the Silk Road was not limited to material goods. It served as a primary conduit for the transmission of religious ideas, most notably Buddhism. The faith, or Dharma, spread from its origins in India into Central Asia and eventually to China, largely carried by monks and merchants who travelled in the wake of the trade caravans. The journey was not a simple one-way transmission, but a complex, multi-directional process of cultural and theological adaptation. The arid oases of the Tarim Basin, which were vital for commerce, were also transformed into major centers of Buddhist learning. The initial spread of Buddhism into Central Asia occurred during the Kushan Empire, a period of political stability that facilitated the movement of people. Buddhist monasteries were established in key trading towns such as Khotan, Kashgar, and Kutcha. These monasteries served not only as centers for religious practice and scholarship, but also as vital support systems for the caravans. Monks provided hospitality to travelers, and in return, merchants offered donations that sustained the religious communities. This symbiotic relationship was fundamental to the faith's propagation. The presence of a welcoming religious community along a perilous trade route made the journey more appealing and less dangerous for merchants, who in turn became active proselytizers. The translation of Buddhist scriptures was a pivotal aspect of this spread. Monks, often traveling for centuries, meticulously copied and translated religious texts from Sanskrit and other languages into a variety of Central Asian dialects, and eventually into Chinese. The work of translators like Kumrajva, who was a Central Asian monk from the kingdom of Kucha, was instrumental. He moved to Chang'an, the Han capital, in the late 4th century, and translated dozens of Buddhist sutras into Chinese, introducing a new and complex philosophical framework to East Asia. His translations were revered for their clarity and accuracy, and they became foundational texts for Chinese Buddhism. The faith's eastward movement was not without its challenges. It had to compete with local traditions, including shamanism and Zoroastrianism, and adapt to the social and philosophical norms of a different culture. However, its emphasis on salvation, compassion, and the pursuit of enlightenment resonated with many. Archaeological evidence from the Mogao caves near Dunhuang, a major hub on the Silk Road, illustrates this synthesis. The cave murals, created over a period of 1,000 years, depict a rich blend of artistic styles, from Greco-Buddhist to Chinese, and provide a visual record of the faith's eastward journey. These images show Buddhist deities in landscapes reminiscent of Central Asia, surrounded by figures dressed in the garb of diverse peoples, a testament to the Silk Road's role as a meeting place for both commerce and faith. While empires and military powers established the framework for the Silk Road, the true agents of its enduring success were the Sogdian merchants of Central Asia. Originating from the region of Sogdiana, centered around the cities of Samarkand and Bukhara, this Iranian people did not possess a vast, unified empire, but instead built an expansive network of commercial colonies that spanned the length of the trade routes. From the 7th to the 10th centuries, their influence was paramount, and their language, Sogdian, became the lingua franca of Central Asian commerce. The Sogdian strategy was a testament to their commercial acumen. They established permanent settlements in key urban centers along the Silk Road, from their homeland in Central Asia all the way to Chang'an, the capital of Tang China. These colonies, or diaspora communities, were tightly knit, self-governing enclaves that provided a secure and trusted environment for conducting business. A Sogdian merchant traveling eastward from Samarkand knew he would find lodging, supplies, and a familiar social structure in the Sogdian community of Dunhuang or Lanzhou. This network of trust and shared culture was a crucial counter to the dangers and unpredictability of long-distance trade. Their commercial activities were diverse and sophisticated. The Sogdians were not merely transporters of goods, they were active traders, financiers, and cultural intermediaries. They dealt in a wide range of commodities, from the valuable silks flowing from China to the horses, furs, and other raw materials of the steppe. They also managed complex credit systems, allowing for transactions to be conducted across vast distances without the need to transport large quantities of gold or silver. Their use of written contracts and trade agreements, often inscribed on wooden slips, provided a formalized legal basis for their commercial ventures. The Sogdian role extended beyond commerce to the dissemination of culture and technology. They were key facilitators in the spread of religious ideas, including Buddhism and Manichaeism, from Central Asia into China. While not all were religious scholars, their movement and presence in key cities created the channels through which these faiths could travel and take root. They also introduced new products and practices to the Chinese court, including new musical forms and instruments, dance styles, and silverworking techniques. Archaeological discoveries, such as Sogdian funerary beds and painted artifacts found in China, provide a detailed visual record of their cultural identity and their status as a cosmopolitan, mobile people who seamlessly blended Central Asian traditions with Chinese aesthetics. In essence, the Sogdians were the essential grease in the wheels of the Silk Road. Their decentralized relational network of trade proved to be more resilient and adaptable than the centralized, military-backed systems of the empires, ensuring the continuous flow of goods and ideas for centuries. The Silk Road was instrumental not only in the exchange of goods, but also in the transmission of foundational technologies that reshaped human civilization. Among the most impactful of these was the secret of Chinese papermaking. For centuries, the Chinese had maintained a monopoly on this technology, relying on materials like mulberry bark, hemp, and rags to create a durable, lightweight, and inexpensive writing surface that was far superior to the parchment and papyrus used in the West. The knowledge of its creation, however, did not spread through traditional commercial channels, but rather through a specific historical event that highlights the unpredictable nature of cultural diffusion. The pivotal moment in the transmission of papermaking occurred in 751 CE at the Battle of Talas. This conflict, fought between the forces of the Abbasid Caliphate and the Tang Dynasty, resulted in a decisive Abbasid victory. Among the prisoners captured by the Arab forces were several Chinese papermakers. These skilled craftsmen were transported to Samarkand, a major intellectual and commercial hub under Abbasid control. Their knowledge was not lost or suppressed. Instead, it was meticulously studied and replicated. The Abbasids, eager to advance their own scientific and administrative capabilities, quickly recognized the immense value of this new technology. The availability of paper in the Abbasid Caliphate spurred an intellectual revolution. Previously, scholars and scribes had relied on parchment, which was expensive and cumbersome, or papyrus, which was fragile and prone to decay. Paper, in contrast, was cheap to produce and easy to store, making it the ideal medium for a society that was expanding its intellectual pursuits in science, medicine, and philosophy. Paper-making mills were soon established in Samarkand, Baghdad, and eventually in major cities across the Islamic world, including Damascus and Cairo. The methods were refined and adapted to local materials, such as flax and linen. This led to a dramatic increase in the production of books and the widespread dissemination of knowledge. From the Islamic world, the technology gradually made its way to Europe. The first paper mills in the European continent were established in Spain in the 12th century, a result of the Iberian Peninsula's close contact with Islamic civilization. Over the next few centuries, paper production spread to Italy, France, and Germany, fundamentally altering the landscape of communication and scholarship in Europe. The transmission of this single invention along the Silk Road thus directly underpinned the rise of the Islamic Golden Age and later contributed to the European Renaissance and the Age of Exploration. The Battle of Talas, while a minor military engagement in the grand scheme of history, had an immeasurable impact, as it was the event that allowed a single transformative technology to be released into the wider world, forever changing the way knowledge was created, stored, and shared. The Tang Dynasty 618-907 CE represents a pinnacle of the Silk Road's influence on Chinese society, as its capital, Chang'an, became a vibrant, cosmopolitan center of global exchange. Unlike earlier dynasties that viewed foreign contact with caution, the Tang court, particularly under Emperor Taizong, embraced a policy of openness that actively encouraged the influx of merchants, diplomats, and religious figures from across Eurasia. This period of political stability and economic prosperity created an unprecedented environment for cultural fusion. The city of Chang'an, at the time the largest and most populous city in the world, was a testament to this global character. Its urban design, with a grid of avenues and wards, was meticulously planned to accommodate the vast population, which included a significant foreign presence. Foreigners, primarily Sogdians and Persians, lived in designated wards and were integrated into the city's commercial and social life. They were subject to Chinese law, but were also allowed to practice their own religions and maintain their cultural traditions. This policy of tolerance was a key factor in attracting foreign traders who could conduct business in a secure environment without fear of persecution. The Tang court actively participated in and benefited from this exchange. Emperors and nobles developed a taste for exotic goods, including spices, precious stones, and rare furs. The imperial stables were filled with horses from the western regions, and the palace gardens cultivated foreign plants and fruits. The influence of foreign culture was pervasive, from the adoption of new musical instruments and dances from Central Asia to the widespread popularity of foreign styles in clothing and jewelry. The court and the gentry adopted elements of foreign aesthetics, integrating them with Chinese artistic traditions to create a new hybrid culture. Religion also flowed freely into the Tang capital. Buddhism, which had been slowly spreading for centuries, reached its zenith during this era, with numerous monasteries and temples established throughout Chang'an. Other faiths, including Zoroastrianism, Manichaeism, and Nestorian Christianity, also gained a foothold, as evidenced by the ruins of their temples and the presence of their adherents in the city. The Tang state, while officially supporting Confucianism and Taoism, generally allowed these foreign religions to coexist peacefully, a policy that stood in stark contrast to the religious persecutions that would occur in later periods. The cosmopolitanism of the Tang dynasty was not just a side effect of trade. It was a deliberate policy that made the capital a hub for the free flow of goods, ideas, and people. This era proved that a great empire could strengthen itself by looking outward, enriching its own culture and economy by embracing its role as a central nexus in the global network of the Silk Road. The Silk Road was a bidirectional conduit for innovation, with ideas and inventions flowing from west to east just as readily as goods moved in the opposite direction. A key example of this transfer was the introduction of Western technologies into China, which was often a deliberate policy of the Tang court. These new skills and processes were not always a result of open trade, but sometimes came through diplomatic missions or the movement of skilled artisans. One of the most significant technological transfers was the art of glassmaking. While glass had been known in China for centuries, it was primarily used for beads and ornaments. The Chinese did not possess the techniques to create the high-quality, transparent glassware that was common in the Roman and Sasanian empires. This changed during the Tang dynasty, as artisans from the west, particularly from Persia and the Byzantine Empire, travelled to Chang'an. Their arrival was often encouraged by the imperial court, which had a keen interest in acquiring new skills and products. These foreign craftsmen introduced advanced techniques for molding, blowing, and coloring glass, enabling the Chinese to produce their own high-quality vessels and decorative objects for the first time. The archaeological record from this period shows a distinct increase in the presence of sophisticated glassware in China, a testament to the successful adoption of this Western technology. Beyond glassmaking, the Silk Road facilitated the introduction of new agricultural methods and crops. New species of plants and seeds from Central Asia and the Near East were brought to China, enriching its agricultural base and diversifying the diet of its people. The flow of botanical knowledge was often accompanied by skilled farmers who introduced new irrigation techniques and planting schedules. This exchange was a practical and ongoing process that was vital to the sustainability of the growing Chinese population. Furthermore, new medical knowledge and astronomical theories also traveled east. The works of Hippocrates and Galen, translated and interpreted through Persian and Central Asian intermediaries, began to influence Chinese medicine. Similarly, Western astronomical instruments and computational methods made their way to imperial observatories, complementing and refining Chinese celestial observations. These new ideas were not simply adopted without question. They were often integrated into existing Chinese frameworks, creating a synthesis of knowledge. The transmission of these various technologies underscores the fact that the Silk Road was far more than a commercial artery. It was a dynamic network for the exchange of intellectual capital, where the mastery of new skills and the integration of foreign ideas enriched civilizations at both ends of the Eurasian landmass, shaping their development for centuries to come. The Silk Road's role as a conduit for religious and cultural exchange is profoundly illustrated by the journey of Xuanzang. This Tang Dynasty Buddhist monk, dissatisfied with the translations of scriptures available in China, embarked on a perilous 17-year pilgrimage to India in search of original Sanskrit texts. His journey was not a commercial venture, but an intellectual and spiritual quest that would ultimately have a significant impact on both the transmission of knowledge and the diplomatic relations between China and the West. Departing China without imperial permission in 629 CE, Xuanzang's travels took him through the Central Asian kingdoms, over the towering Hindu Kush mountains, and across the breadth of the Indian subcontinent. His route, meticulously documented in his own writings, provides a detailed historical and geographical account of the Silk Road and the cultures along its path. He visited major Buddhist centers of learning, including the famous Nalanda University, where he spent years studying and debating with the most accomplished scholars of his time. His fluency in Sanskrit and his deep understanding of Buddhist philosophy earned him the respect of Indian kings and religious leaders. Xuanzang's return to China in 645 CE was a momentous event. He brought with him over 650 volumes of Buddhist scriptures, a massive collection of relics, and a wealth of new information on the geography and customs of the West. His journey transformed him from a renegade monk into a national hero, and he was welcomed back with great fanfare by Emperor Taizong. The emperor, who had previously forbidden his departure, now recognized the immense value of his pilgrimage and provided imperial support for his translation efforts. For the remainder of his life, Xuanzang dedicated himself to the systematic translation of the scriptures he had collected. He established a state-sponsored translation bureau and, with a team of assistants, meticulously rendered the complex Sanskrit texts into Chinese. His translations were not only accurate but also philosophically sophisticated, introducing new concepts of consciousness and reality to Chinese Buddhism. His work had a profound and lasting impact on the development of East Asian Buddhist thought, laying the foundation for new schools of philosophy and religious practice. Beyond the religious sphere, Xuanzang's detailed travelogue, Journey to the West in the Great Tang Records, became an invaluable historical and geographical resource for the Chinese court. It provided critical intelligence on the political structures, military strengths, and economic resources of the Western regions, information that was vital for Tang foreign policy. In this way, Xuanzang's singular quest for spiritual enlightenment opened new avenues for cultural and diplomatic exchange, proving that the Silk Road was a channel for intellectual capital as much as it was for commercial goods. The cosmopolitan era of the Tang Dynasty, and with it the first golden age of the Silk Road, was brought to a catastrophic end by the An Rebellion, a military uprising that fundamentally reshaped the political and economic landscape of China. The rebellion, which began in 755 CE, was led by An Lushan, a powerful general of Sogdian and Turkish descent who controlled a large portion of the Tang military. His revolt was a direct result of the Tang court's internal weaknesses, including political corruption and a growing reliance on frontier generals. The rebellion plunged the Tang Empire into a period of prolonged civil war and chaos. To quell the uprising, the Tang court was forced to withdraw its frontier garrisons, including the vital military units that secured the Hexi Corridor and the western regions. These forces were redeployed to defend the imperial heartland, leaving the western trade routes undefended. As the Tang central government lost control, the Sogdian and other Central Asian kingdoms that had relied on Tang military protection became vulnerable to external threats. These included the Tibetans, who swiftly moved to occupy the unguarded territories and gain control over the oases and passes of the Silk Road. The Tibetan occupation was a significant geopolitical event. It effectively severed the main overland route between China and Central Asia. The trade and diplomatic missions that had flowed so freely during the Tang's golden age came to a near halt. The once bustling caravansaries fell into disuse, and the vibrant Sogdian communities in Chang'an and other Chinese cities were either destroyed or dispersed. The rebellion marked a permanent shift in power dynamics. The Tang dynasty never fully recovered its former military and economic strength. It became a diminished power, and its focus turned inward, away from the grand imperial ambitions of its earlier years. The economic consequences of this disruption were profound. China's direct access to the goods and markets of the West was cut off. The flow of silk, ceramics, and other valuable goods to the West was severely restricted, and the influx of Western technologies and ideas was similarly curtailed. This forced a new reliance on the southern maritime trade routes, which grew in importance as a result of the overland disruption. The An Lushan rebellion did not destroy the Silk Road entirely, but it fragmented it. It decentralized the trade network, giving rise to new intermediaries and shifting the primary corridors of exchange. The era of a single, unified road under the auspices of a powerful, stable empire was over, and the trade would now have to navigate a new, more complex geopolitical reality. While the An Lushan rebellion fractured the Silk Road's eastern nexus, a new political and economic power arose in the West to rekindle and reorient the ancient trade routes. This was the Abbasid Caliphate 750-1258 CE, which established a new Islamic Golden Age centered around its capital, Baghdad. The Abbasids' rise to power coincided with the Tang dynasty's internal struggles, creating an opportunity for them to consolidate control over the western and central segments of the Silk Road. The Abbasid state was founded on a sophisticated administrative and commercial structure that was highly conducive to trade. Unlike previous empires that relied on a military-backed tributary system, the Abbasids fostered an economy based on commerce and scholarship. Their capital, Baghdad, was strategically located on the Tigris River, making it a major hub for both overland and maritime trade. The city's massive population and immense wealth created a powerful market for goods from across Eurasia, from Chinese silks and porcelain to Indian spices and African ivory. The Abbasid government actively supported merchants and innovators, and their stable rule provided a secure environment for business to flourish. The Caliphate's economic prosperity was mirrored by an intellectual awakening. The House of Wisdom in Baghdad, a grand library and translation center, attracted scholars from across the known world. They meticulously translated and studied Greek, Persian, and Indian scientific and philosophical texts. sparking an unprecedented period of discovery and innovation. This intellectual fervor had direct implications for trade. For example, advances in mathematics and astronomy enabled more accurate navigation and cartography, which in turn made long-distance travel and commerce more efficient. The Abbasids also became a dominant force in the production and export of goods. They acquired the secrets of papermaking at the Battle of Talas, which led to the proliferation of paper mills throughout the Caliphate. This new, inexpensive medium fueled the intellectual revolution and became a significant export commodity. Furthermore, Islamic artisans in cities like Damascus became masters of steel production, crafting high-quality blades that were in demand across the continent. The Abbasid Caliphate's role was not just to connect existing networks, but to revitalize them and become a major producer and consumer in its own right. Their economic power and intellectual dynamism ensured that even with the decline of the Tang, the Silk Road continued to thrive. The center of gravity for the overland trade had simply shifted westward, with the Islamic world acting as the new nexus for the exchange of goods and ideas across the entire Eurasian landmass. A new generation of Muslim merchants and scholars emerged as the primary drivers of Eurasian commerce, building upon the established networks and pushing them to new frontiers. These individuals were not merely transporters of goods, they were financiers, innovators, and cultural emissaries who integrated disparate trade routes into a cohesive and efficient global system. Their success was rooted in a sophisticated commercial culture that placed a high value on contracts, credit, and trust. The Islamic legal and administrative frameworks provided a stable environment for merchants to operate. Concepts like hawala, an informal system for transferring money, and the use of bills of exchange, suftajar, allowed for transactions to be conducted across vast distances without the need to physically transport gold and silver. This reduced the risk of banditry and made long-distance trade more secure and efficient. Merchants also organized themselves into partnerships mudaraba, sharing capital and risk in commercial ventures. This collaborative approach enabled them to fund larger, more ambitious expeditions to remote regions. Muslim merchants ventured far beyond the traditional Silk Road routes. In the east, they established commercial ties with the Silla Kingdom in Korea and the Wa State in Japan, and their presence is well documented in the port cities of Canton and Guangzhou in China. In the south, they dominated the Indian Ocean maritime trade, establishing prosperous communities in coastal cities from East Africa to Indonesia. The network of Islamic trade was not limited to land, but extended across the oceans, creating a truly global web of commercial exchange. These merchants were also scholars and geographers, meticulously documenting their travels. Works such as Ibn Battuta's Rihla and the accounts of other travelers provided invaluable geographical and ethnographic information, which was later used to create more accurate maps and navigational charts. This intellectual curiosity was a key element of their success. Beyond the exchange of goods, these merchants were central to the spread of Islamic culture. They carried their language, their legal traditions, and their faith with them. Their establishment of prayer houses and mosques in distant commercial hubs contributed to the growth of Muslim communities, which in turn became new centers for trade and learning. The integration of commerce and scholarship was a hallmark of their approach. They were deeply pragmatic individuals who understood that a stable, knowledgeable, and interconnected world was a prosperous one. By adopting the networks of their predecessors and expanding them through financial innovation, intellectual curiosity, and a unified legal system, this new generation of merchants created a commercial golden age that revitalized the ancient pathways and connected the far-flung corners of the known world as never before. The Silk Road, in addition to being a commercial highway, was a powerful conduit for artistic fusion. It facilitated the blending of disparate styles, creating new forms of expression that drew from the diverse cultures along its path. This artistic exchange was particularly evident in the art of the Eurasian steppe, which served as a dynamic crossroads where motifs and techniques from Greece, Rome, India, Persia, and China converged. One of the most notable examples of this syncretism is the Greco-Buddhist art of the Gandhara region, a testament to the influence of Hellenistic culture on Buddhist religious expression. Under the Kushan Empire, Greek artistic conventions such as lifelike anatomical forms, classical drapery, and detailed facial expressions were applied to the depiction of the Buddha and other Buddhist figures. The Buddha, who had previously been represented aniconically through symbols like footprints or a Bodhi tree, was now rendered in human form, a representation that would become the standard for Buddhist art across Asia. This artistic fusion was carried eastward by merchants and monks, influencing the styles of murals and sculptures in the cave complexes of Central Asia, such as those at Dunhuang and Bamiyan. Further east, Persian and Central Asian motifs were incorporated into Chinese art during the Tang Dynasty. The popularity of Sogdian and Persian culture in Chang'an led to the adoption of new decorative patterns and techniques. Chinese artisans began to use the vibrant blues and greens of Persian ceramics, and their metalwork incorporated designs found on Sasanian silver plates, such as hunting scenes and fantastical beasts. The famous Tang Sankai three-color ceramics, while a distinctly Chinese innovation, often featured forms and motifs that showed foreign influence, such as the camels and foreign riders that were common subjects. These pieces, found in elite tombs, demonstrate how foreign aesthetics were not just copied, but integrated into a new artistic vocabulary. This artistic blending was a two-way street. Chinese motifs, such as dragons and phoenixes, and techniques, such as silk weaving and lacquering, made their way westward. Chinese silk, for instance, often featured a blend of traditional Chinese designs and Central Asian or Persian animal motifs created specifically for foreign markets. The portability of these goods, which were easily transported by caravan, made them ideal vehicles for the dissemination of artistic styles across vast distances. The art of the steppe, and of the Silk Road as a whole, was a fluid, adaptive phenomenon that proved that artistic creativity flourished in the intersection of cultures. It was a visual language of globalization, a silent record of the exchange that shaped the cultures of Eurasia and created a shared aesthetic that transcended political and geographical boundaries. The flourishing Silk Road of the 9th and 10th centuries, defined by the complementary golden ages of the Tang and Abbasid dynasties, faced a profound period of disruption as both empires succumbed to internal fragmentation. The stability that had fostered a vibrant transcontinental exchange evaporated, replaced by a political vacuum that fundamentally altered the flow of goods and people. This era of decentralized power marked a significant challenge to the established trade networks. In China, the Tang Dynasty entered a period of terminal decline in the mid-9th century. The central government lost its grip on the provinces, and powerful regional governors and military commanders asserted their independence. This led to a period known as the 5 Dynasties and 10 Kingdoms, a time of constant warfare and political instability. The chaos made the overland trade routes perilous. Merchants could no longer rely on a single, powerful authority to guarantee their safety or enforce commercial law. The lucrative trade in silk and other goods from China to the West became far more difficult and less predictable. The collapse of the Tang also disrupted the flow of Chinese currency, a stable medium of exchange that had facilitated commerce for centuries. Concurrently, the Abbasid Caliphate was experiencing its own form of political disintegration. Beginning in the late 9th century, the caliphate's power was increasingly challenged by breakaway dynasties and independent rulers. The rise of local powers, such as the Samanids in Central Asia and the Fatimids in Egypt, fractured the political unity of the Islamic world. While these new states often promoted their own regional economies, they lacked the centralized authority and military might of the Abbasids to secure the entire length of the Silk Road from the Mediterranean to Central Asia. The absence of a single hegemonic power meant that trade had to navigate a complex and often hostile patchwork of competing states, each with its own tariffs, laws, and military forces. This political fragmentation had immediate economic consequences. The security and predictability of the trade routes diminished, leading to a decline in large-scale caravan expeditions. Merchants began to favor shorter, more localized segments of the road, and the overall volume of goods exchanged decreased. The focus shifted from long-distance, high-value commodities to more regional bulk trade. While the Silk Road did not disappear entirely, it became a less reliable and more dangerous system. The collapse of the Tang and Abbasid dynasties demonstrated the fragile dependency of the transcontinental trade on the stability of powerful, centralized empires. It was an era that proved that the flow of goods, ideas, and people, however resilient, could not long outlast the political and economic foundations that enabled it. The political and economic fragmentation of the Silk Road was abruptly and decisively ended by the unprecedented conquests of the Mongol Empire. Under the leadership of Genghis Khan and his successors, the Mongols brought the entire Eurasian landmass under a single, unified political authority. Their military campaigns, while initially destructive, ultimately created a vast, continuous empire that for the first time in history connected China and the Middle East by a single, secure route. This period, known as the Pax Mongolica, was an era of stability that allowed for a dramatic resurgence in transcontinental exchange. The Mongols' primary contribution to the Silk Road was not a new trade good, but a new political and administrative framework. They established a uniform legal code, the Yasa, which applied to all peoples within their dominion. This legal unity, enforced by military power, drastically reduced the risk of banditry and local conflicts that had plagued the trade routes for centuries. Merchants no longer had to navigate a series of hostile and independent states. They could travel for thousands of kilometers with a single common legal protection. To facilitate this travel, the Mongols developed the paisa, a type of passport or tablet that granted the bearer safe passage and access to official post stations. This innovation was a testament to the Mongols' pragmatic approach to governance, prioritizing the efficient movement of people and information. To support the flow of trade and communication, the Mongols created the Yam, a sophisticated and highly efficient network of courier stations and rest stops. Located at regular intervals across the empire, the Yam provided fresh horses, food, and lodging for official messengers and privileged merchants. This system, which had been designed for rapid military communication, was adapted to serve commercial interests, allowing for the swift and secure transport of goods and information. The Mongols understood that a prosperous empire required a connected one, and they invested immense resources into maintaining and expanding this infrastructure. The Mongol unification transformed the Silk Road from a series of fragmented corridors into a single, cohesive network. This new environment encouraged an unprecedented level of exchange, as goods, technologies, and ideas flowed freely across the continent. Christian missionaries, Buddhist monks, and Muslim scholars traveled with relative ease, and the volume of commerce, particularly in silks, spices, and ceramics, reached a scale not seen since the Tang Dynasty. While the Mongol conquests were initially a period of immense violence, their subsequent political unification of Eurasia created the most secure and vibrant environment for transcontinental trade that the world had ever known. The period of relative stability and security under the Mongol Empire, known as the Pax Mongolica, created an unprecedented environment for transcontinental exchange. For the first time, a single political authority governed a vast, contiguous landmass, stretching from Eastern Europe to the Pacific Ocean. This geopolitical unity eliminated the need for merchants to negotiate with a series of disparate and often hostile states. The result was a dramatic resurgence in the volume and scope of trade, intellectual exchange, and diplomatic contact. The Mongols' most significant contribution to commerce was a unified legal and administrative framework. They established a comprehensive legal code, the Yasa, which provided a common legal basis for all peoples within their dominion. This legal uniformity, enforced by military power, drastically reduced the risk of banditry and local conflicts, which had been major impediments to long-distance trade. To facilitate travel, they developed the paisa, a type of passport or tablet that granted the bearer safe passage and access to official post stations. This innovation was a testament to the Mongols' pragmatic approach to governance, prioritizing the efficient movement of people and information. The Mongols' administration of the Silk Road was systematic and highly organized. They established the Yam, a sophisticated and highly efficient network of courier stations and rest stops, located at regular intervals across the empire. This system provided fresh horses, food, and lodging for official messengers and privileged merchants, allowing for the swift and secure transport of goods and information. The Mongols understood that a prosperous empire required a connected one, and they invested immense resources in maintaining this infrastructure. This new environment encouraged an unprecedented level of exchange. Goods, technologies, and ideas flowed freely across the continent. Christian missionaries, such as William of Rubruck and John of Plano Carpini, travelled with relative ease, and their detailed accounts provided Europeans with their first-hand information about the Mongol Empire and the cultures of East Asia. Muslim scholars and merchants, likewise, expanded their networks and founded new communities. The volume of commerce, particularly in silks, spices, and ceramics, reached a scale not seen since the Tang Dynasty. The Pax Mongolica transformed the Silk Road from a series of fragmented corridors into a single, cohesive network, fostering a period of cultural and commercial globalization that would not be matched for centuries. The stability of the Pax Mongolica enabled a new type of European traveller to venture deep into the Asian continent. The most famous of these was the Venetian merchant Marco Polo, whose travels and subsequent literary account provided Europeans with their first comprehensive, first-hand look at the sophisticated civilizations and immense wealth of the East. While not the first European to make the journey, his book, The Travels of Marco Polo, was unique in its level of detail and its broad dissemination. Marco Polo's journey to the court of Kublai Khan was a commercial and diplomatic mission. He, along with his father Niccolo and uncle Maffeo, departed Venice in 1271, carrying letters from the Pope to the Mongol ruler. The Polos traversed the entire length of the Silk Road, a journey that would have been impossible without the security and administrative infrastructure provided by the Mongol Empire. Their path took them through Persia, across the mountains of Afghanistan, through the oases of the Taklamakan Desert, and eventually to the Mongol court at Xanadu. This journey was a testament to the safety and connectivity of the Mongol-controlled routes, where a single authority governed vast distances. Upon their arrival, Marco Polo was received favourably by Kublai Khan. He was not merely a merchant, but became a trusted advisor and official in the Khan's court, serving in various administrative and diplomatic capacities for nearly 2 decades. This period of service gave him an unparalleled view of the Mongol Empire and the vast landmass under its control. His observations extended beyond commercial matters to include detailed accounts of Chinese cities, which he described as marvels of urban planning and commerce. He documented the use of coal as a fuel source, a technology not yet common in Europe, and the widespread use of paper money, a sophisticated financial system that was a stark contrast to Europe's reliance on metal coinage. The most enduring legacy of Marco Polo's journey was his written account, dictated to a Romance writer named Rustichello da Pisa while in a Genoese prison. The book described the immense wealth and advanced technologies of China and other parts of Asia, including the Great Wall, the bustling port of Quanzhou, and the exotic cultures of India and Southeast Asia. The book's descriptions were so far beyond European experience that many initially dismissed them as pure fiction. However, as the book circulated, it ignited the European imagination, creating a powerful new demand for Asian goods and a strategic imperative to find a direct sea route to the sources of this wealth. The tales of Marco Polo, filtered through the lens of a new, globalizing Europe, served as a foundational text for the age of exploration, inspiring figures like Christopher Columbus and Vasco da Gama to seek out new paths to the east. His journey, enabled by the Mongol peace, ultimately contributed to the very forces that would lead to the decline of the overland Silk Road. The Pax Mongolica did more than just facilitate commerce. It created an unprecedented environment for the flow of high-level diplomatic communication. For the first time, courts and rulers from Europe, Persia, and the Mongol Khanates could exchange ambassadors, emissaries, and scholars with a degree of regularity that was previously impossible. This diplomatic exchange was driven by a complex web of shared interests, including the coordination of military strategy, the negotiation of alliances, and the exchange of intelligence on a global scale. The primary impetus for the European missions was the hope of forging an alliance against a shared enemy. European monarchs, facing threats from the Mamluk Sultanate in Egypt and other Islamic powers, saw the Mongols as a potential ally in a new crusade. Popes and kings dispatched a series of ambassadors, beginning with John of Plano Carpini in 1245 and culminating with the missions of Giovanni da Montecorvino, who was appointed as the first Archbishop of Beijing. These diplomatic missions were a crucial source of information for the European courts, providing detailed intelligence on the immense size and military power of the Mongol Empire and the cultures of East Asia. The Mongol rulers, for their part, also sent their own envoys to Europe, seeking alliances and, in some cases, demanding submission. The diplomatic flow between the Mongol-controlled territories and the Persian court was similarly robust. The Ilkhanate, a Mongol successor state that ruled Persia, maintained regular diplomatic ties with the Golden Horde to its north and the Great Khan in the east. These exchanges were vital for coordinating military campaigns, managing succession disputes, and enforcing the unified legal code across the fractured empire. Persian scholars and administrators, highly valued by the Mongols for their administrative skills, also served as key emissaries, facilitating communication between the various Mongol courts and the wider Islamic world. The Mongol Empire's decentralized structure, with its various khanates, necessitated this constant diplomatic contact to maintain political coherence. The diplomatic exchanges also served as a conduit for the transmission of intellectual and scientific knowledge. Persian and Arab astronomers, for example, traveled to the court of the Great Khan, bringing with them sophisticated astronomical instruments and theories that were integrated with Chinese celestial observation. Similarly, European envoys brought with them new technologies and ideas, though the exchange was heavily weighted in favor of the East. The flow of these ambassadors and emissaries created a geopolitical and intellectual network that underpinned the economic exchange of the Silk Road. It demonstrated that in the era of Mongol unity, the road was not just a commercial highway, but a channel for high-stakes diplomacy and the strategic exchange of intelligence on a global scale. The Silk Road was responsible for the transmission of one of the most transformative and destructive technologies in human history: gunpowder. This substance, originally a Chinese innovation, traveled westward along the trade routes, fundamentally altering the nature of warfare and statecraft in every civilization it reached. Its journey was not a single dramatic event, but a gradual process of diffusion that involved military conflict, trade, and the exchange of scientific knowledge. Gunpowder was first developed in China during the Tang Dynasty, originally for medicinal and alchemical purposes. Its military application was a later development, with its use documented in siege warfare and rudimentary explosive devices during the Song Dynasty. For centuries, the Chinese maintained a monopoly on this technology, with its formula and military applications as a closely guarded secret. However, the Mongol conquests, which facilitated a free flow of information across Eurasia, provided the ideal conditions for its Western transmission. Mongol military engineers, who had a pragmatic approach to acquiring new technologies, encountered gunpowder during their campaigns against the Song. They quickly recognized its potential and incorporated it into their own siege tactics. The Mongol army, with its vast logistical network, became the primary carrier of this technology across the continent. The first documented use of gunpowder weapons in the Islamic world occurred during the Mongol siege of Baghdad in 1258. Persian and Arab military engineers, who were now part of the Ilkhanate, encountered these new weapons firsthand and began to reverse engineer them. The formula for gunpowder, a mixture of sulfur, charcoal, and saltpeter, was likely transmitted along with the initial military knowledge. The process was not a simple matter of copying. It required a significant investment in alchemical and metallurgical research to refine the formula and develop effective delivery systems. Arab scholars were pivotal in this process, and their treatises on alchemy and warfare became the foundational texts for the development of gunpowder in the Islamic world. From the Middle East, the technology traveled to Europe, likely through the trade and military conflicts of the Iberian Peninsula and the Crusades. The first clear European references to gunpowder date to the 13th century, with its use in primitive firearms and cannons becoming more widespread in the 14th century. The arrival of gunpowder in Europe coincided with a period of political fragmentation, and its adoption had profound consequences. It gradually rendered traditional forms of warfare and fortifications obsolete, leading to the decline of feudal castles and the rise of professional standing armies. The cost of manufacturing gunpowder weapons was immense, and their acquisition gave a significant military advantage to the emerging centralized states and monarchies that could afford them. The transmission of this single invention along the Silk Road thus directly contributed to the geopolitical shifts that would define the early modern world, demonstrating how a technological transfer could alter the balance of power across an entire continent. The political unity and security of the Pax Mongolica, which had fostered an unprecedented era of trade, was a fleeting historical phenomenon. The vast Mongol Empire, established through conquest, was ultimately unsustainable in its original form. By the mid-14th century, it had fragmented into a series of independent and often warring khanates. This political disintegration led to a significant decline in the safety of the overland trade routes, and with it, a return to the political instability that had characterized the pre-Mongol era. The fragmentation began with the death of Kublai Khan in 1294. The vast empire was divided into four main successor states: the Golden Horde in the north, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, the Il Khanate in Persia, and the Yuan dynasty in China. While these khanates initially maintained diplomatic and commercial ties, their shared unity gradually eroded. Each successor state developed its own distinct political, economic, and cultural identity, and their internal conflicts and border disputes made travel across their territories increasingly difficult. The unified legal and security framework that had been a hallmark of the Pax Mongolica was replaced by a fragmented system of competing jurisdictions. The result of this political decentralization was a marked increase in banditry and a general decline in the predictability of the trade routes. Merchants could no longer rely on a single universal authority to guarantee their safety or to enforce commercial contracts. The paisa, the passport that had once offered safe passage from Beijing to Constantinople, lost its universal authority. Caravans were once again vulnerable to raids, and the cost of doing business in both financial terms and personal risks skyrocketed. This instability forced merchants to return to more localized and regional trade, avoiding the long-distance, high-value commerce that had flourished during the period of Mongol unity. Furthermore, the fragmentation of the Mongol Empire coincided with other geopolitical shifts. The Yuan dynasty in China was overthrown in 1368, replaced by the isolationist Ming dynasty. The Ilkhanate in Persia collapsed, leading to a new period of regional warfare. The Golden Horde's power was similarly in decline, with new competing powers emerging on its borders. The cumulative effect of these changes was the effective closure of the overland Silk Road as a unified transcontinental route. While some trade continued, it did so on a much reduced scale and with immense difficulty. The demise of the Mongol Khans demonstrated that a single, unified political authority was a necessary, though not sufficient, condition for the sustained prosperity of the Silk Road. The absence of that authority plunged Eurasia back into an era of fragmented power, and the great overland network entered a long terminal decline. The political fragmentation that followed the decline of the Mongol Empire was temporarily reversed by the conquests of Timur, a Central Asian ruler who established a powerful dynasty in the late 14th century. Timur, or Tamerlane, was a self-proclaimed restorer of the Mongol Empire, and his military campaigns, while incredibly destructive, ultimately led to a brief resurgence of land-based trade. The Timurid dynasty 1370-1507 and its patronage of the arts and sciences created a new golden age in Central Asia that, for a time, brought new life to the old Silk Road. Timur's primary contribution to the trade routes was a return to a unified, centralized political authority. His vast empire, which at its peak stretched from modern-day Turkey to India, brought the central segments of the Silk Road under a single rule. This re-established a degree of security that had been absent for decades. The threat of banditry was suppressed by a powerful military, and a new administrative framework was established to manage the flow of goods and people. Timur was a pragmatic ruler who understood that a flourishing empire required a stable economy, and he actively encouraged commerce by protecting merchants and investing in infrastructure. The Timurid capital, Samarkand, became a major hub for this renewed trade. Timur, who had an immense appetite for the arts and sciences, brought architects, scholars, and artisans from across his empire to his court. Their presence transformed the city into a vibrant center of intellectual and cultural exchange. It became a nexus where goods from China, India, and the Middle East were traded alongside new scientific ideas, particularly in the fields of astronomy and mathematics. The city's markets were renowned for their variety, and its mosques and observatories were architectural marvels that reflected the wealth and sophistication of the Timurid state. While Timur's empire was a brilliant but temporary phenomenon, his successors maintained a high level of patronage for the arts and sciences. This was most evident in the court of Ulu Beg, a Timurid ruler and a gifted astronomer. His observatory in Samarkand, constructed in the 1420s, was one of the most advanced of its time. It housed a massive sextant and other instruments that allowed for precise astronomical observations, which were vital for navigation and timekeeping, both of which had direct implications for trade. The intellectual and commercial life that flourished under the Timurids was a final testament to the resilience of the overland trade. It proved that even as the political landscape of Eurasia shifted, the fundamental impulse for trade and the exchange of ideas could be revived, if only a strong and stable power was there to protect and nurture it. The rise of the Ming Dynasty in 1368 marked a profound and deliberate shift in China's relationship with the rest of the world. After overthrowing the Mongol-led Yuan dynasty, the new Ming rulers adopted a policy of inward-looking isolationism that systematically dismantled the political and economic frameworks that had supported the Silk Road's eastern terminus for centuries. This change in foreign policy was a direct rejection of the cosmopolitanism of the Mongol and Tang eras. The Ming court, viewing the Mongol period as an age of foreign domination, sought to restore traditional Chinese institutions and assert a new, more insular identity. This led to a series of edicts that restricted foreign trade and contact. The most significant of these was the formal prohibition of private maritime trade and the closure of key ports. While the famous naval expeditions of Admiral Zhang, he demonstrated a brief, powerful capacity for global engagement, their purpose was not commercial but diplomatic and tributary, intended to project imperial power rather than to foster private commerce. These grand voyages were abruptly ended in the 1430s, and the technology and knowledge of ocean-going vessels were largely suppressed. On land, the Ming policy was equally restrictive. The government fortified the Great Wall and strengthened its northern borders, but it did so with a defensive, rather than an expansive, mindset. The overland trade routes to Central Asia, once bustling arteries of commerce, were reduced to channels for limited, state-controlled tributary missions. The vibrant Sogdian and other foreign merchant communities that had thrived in Chinese cities during the Tang and Yuan dynasties were expelled or assimilated, and foreign travel was heavily discouraged. The state's monopoly on foreign relations meant that the informal, merchant-driven exchange that had been the lifeblood of the Silk Road was effectively criminalized. This deliberate policy of commercial and cultural isolation had a direct and devastating impact on the eastern segment of the Silk Road. With the Ming government no longer a willing partner, the flow of goods from China to the west dwindled to a trickle. The once bustling oases and trading towns of the Hexi Corridor and the Taklamakan Desert fell into decline, as their primary economic function connecting China to the rest of Eurasia was no longer viable on a large scale. The Ming dynasty's inward turn, combined with the political fragmentation of the Mongol Empire in Central Asia, effectively rendered the overland Silk Road as a unified transcontinental route obsolete. The center of global trade would soon shift to the oceans, a change that the Ming themselves had inadvertently accelerated by their policies. As the eastern terminus of the overland Silk Road was systematically closed by the Ming dynasty, its western half was being consolidated by a new Anatolian power, the Ottoman Empire. The rise of this state marked a significant shift in the geopolitics of Eurasia and was a contributing factor in the eventual decline of the land-based trade networks. The Ottomans, through a series of strategic military conquests, gradually gained control over the key choke points that connected Asia to Europe. The Ottoman Empire, founded in the late 13th century, initially expanded at the expense of the fragmented Byzantine Empire and other smaller states in Anatolia. Their early military successes were a testament to their disciplined army and their pragmatic approach to governance. Their most significant conquest was the capture of Constantinople in 1453. This event was a major turning point, as it gave them control over the Bosporus Strait, a vital waterway that connected the Black Sea to the Mediterranean and was a crucial artery for trade. The fall of the city, which had for centuries been the ultimate western terminus of the Silk Road, effectively gave the Ottomans a monopoly on all overland trade entering Europe from the east. The Ottomans' control over the trade routes was not absolute, but it was significant. They managed a complex system of tolls, taxes, and tariffs on all goods passing through their territory. This taxation was a major source of revenue for the empire, funding its massive military and sophisticated administrative apparatus. The merchants of Europe, who had for centuries relied on indirect trade through Venetian and Genoese intermediaries, now found themselves dealing with a single powerful authority that could dictate terms. The immense profits that the Ottomans reaped from this trade gave them a powerful economic incentive to maintain a high degree of control over their borders and to actively regulate the flow of goods. Furthermore, the Ottoman presence in the Eastern Mediterranean and the Near East was a significant military and diplomatic reality that the European powers could not ignore. The Ottomans' military strength and their control over the trade routes forced European monarchs to seek alternative paths to the riches of the East. The European exploration of the Atlantic, which would lead to the Age of Discovery, was therefore not solely a result of navigational improvements or a new spirit of inquiry. It was a strategic response to the consolidation of Ottoman power. The Ottoman Empire's rise fundamentally altered the economic landscape of Europe, spurring a search for new sea routes to Asia that would ultimately make the overland Silk Road obsolete. The rise of the Ottoman Empire reached its symbolic and practical apex with the conquest of Constantinople in 1453. This event was not just a military victory, it was a profound geopolitical and economic turning point that marked the definitive closing of the traditional land bridge between Europe and Asia. For over a millennium, Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire, had served as the ultimate western terminus of the Silk Road. Its strategic location on the Bosporus Strait gave it control over both overland and maritime traffic, making it an indispensable hub for merchants and diplomats from across Eurasia. The Ottoman siege of the city was a masterpiece of military engineering. Mehmed II, the Ottoman Sultan, brought with him a massive army and an artillery train that included the largest cannons ever built at the time. These colossal siege guns, capable of breaching the city's ancient walls, demonstrated the overwhelming military power of the Ottomans and their mastery of the new technologies that had travelled west along the Silk Road. The fall of Constantinople after a 53-day siege was a clear signal to the European powers that the balance of power had fundamentally shifted. The once impenetrable city, a last bastion of the Roman Empire, was now the new capital of a formidable Islamic empire. The direct economic consequence of this conquest was that the Ottoman Empire now held a monopoly on all overland trade entering Europe from the east. They did not shut down the trade entirely. Rather, they subjected it to a rigorous system of tolls and tariffs. This was a strategic move that allowed them to reap immense profits from the flow of goods. However, the costs and political risks of trading through Ottoman-controlled territory became prohibitive for many European merchants. The Ottomans' control was not a sudden, complete closure, but a systematic and profitable regulation that forced European merchants into a position of dependence. The fall of Constantinople created a new and powerful urgency in the capitals of Europe. The traditional avenues of trade had been choked off, and the immense wealth of Asia was now controlled by a single, often hostile, power. The search for a direct sea route to the east was no longer a matter of academic interest or a secondary alternative. It became a strategic imperative for every major European monarchy. The Portuguese, who had been methodically exploring the African coast for decades, accelerated their efforts. The Spanish, seeking their own path, would soon sponsor the voyages of Christopher Columbus. The fall of Constantinople was therefore the historical event that pushed the European powers out of the Mediterranean and onto the open ocean. It marked the end of the Silk Road's geopolitical relevance as a primary trade route and inaugurated a new era of global maritime exploration that would forever alter the course of human history. The consolidation of the Ottoman Empire's power and its control over the traditional trade routes created a powerful strategic and economic imperative for the kingdoms of Europe. The traditional avenues for acquiring the highly profitable goods of Asia were either subject to crippling tariffs or were completely inaccessible. This spurred a desperate and sustained search for a direct maritime route to the east that would bypass the Ottoman chokehold. This quest, driven by a combination of economic ambition, religious zeal, and technological innovation, would inaugurate a new era of global exploration. The pioneering efforts were led by the Portuguese. Situated on the Atlantic seaboard, they were well positioned to embark on a quest to sail around Africa to reach the Indian Ocean. Their early exploration was a methodical and state-sponsored affair, beginning with Prince Henry the Navigator in the 15th century. Portuguese mariners, using new navigational instruments like the astrolabe and caravels with lateen sails, gradually charted the western coast of Africa. These expeditions were not only about finding a route to Asia, they were also a lucrative commercial venture in their own right, involving trade in gold, ivory, and slaves. The methodical southward advance was a testament to a long-term strategic vision, culminating in Bartholomew Dias's rounding of the Cape of Good Hope in 1488. This proved that a sea route to the Indian Ocean was a practical possibility. The Spanish, facing their own geopolitical challenges and driven by a similar desire for direct access to Asian markets, sought a westward route across the Atlantic. This led to Christopher Columbus's fateful voyages, which, while failing to reach Asia, inadvertently led to the discovery of the Americas. The Spanish pursuit of a westward passage was driven by the same economic logic that had motivated the Portuguese: a desperate need to circumvent the Ottoman monopoly and gain a share of the immense profits of the spice trade. The English, French, and Dutch were not far behind. The Dutch East India Company and the English East India Company were chartered as a direct result of this imperative. These powerful state-backed corporations were given monopolies on trade in Asia and were equipped with their own armies and navies. Their rise signaled a new era of commercial warfare, with European powers competing fiercely for control over global trade. The relentless European quest for new routes was therefore a direct consequence of the geopolitical realities on the ground in Eurasia. The closure of the traditional Silk Road by a single powerful empire forced a redirection of global commerce, setting in motion a series of events that would fundamentally alter the balance of power and lead to a new era of global maritime dominance. The systematic and methodical quest for a maritime route to the east reached its culmination with the historic voyage of Vasco da Gama. His successful navigation of the African coast and his arrival in India in 1498 was a singular event that fundamentally altered the dynamics of global commerce and signaled the definitive shift from overland to oceanic trade. Da Gama's journey was the result of a long-term strategic vision pursued by the Portuguese crown, which had been charting the African coastline for over a half-century. Da Gama's fleet, consisting of 4 ships, departed from Lisbon in July 1497. The voyage was an immense logistical and navigational challenge, requiring a level of planning and expertise that had been built upon decades of Portuguese exploration. The fleet navigated the open Atlantic, made a wide westward sweep to catch favourable winds, and successfully rounded the Cape of Good Hope. This part of the journey was a testament to the methodical and precise cartography and seamanship that the Portuguese had pioneered. After rounding the Cape, the fleet sailed into the uncharted waters of the Indian Ocean, a move that placed them in direct competition with the established Arab and Indian maritime trade networks. Upon reaching the East African coast, Da Gama's expedition encountered a series of wealthy Islamic port cities, including Mombasa and Malindi, which were already integral parts of the Indian Ocean trade. Here, he acquired a pilot who had knowledge of the monsoon winds and could guide the fleet across the ocean. The final leg of the journey took them to Calicut on the Malabar coast of India. Their arrival was met with a mix of curiosity and indifference by the local ruler, the Zamarin of Calicut, who was a key player in the thriving spice trade. Da Gama's initial attempts at trade were a commercial failure. The goods he had brought from Portugal, primarily coarse woolens and other textiles, were of little value in the sophisticated Indian markets. However, the mission's ultimate objective was not a single profitable transaction, but the establishment of a permanent trade route. The return to Portugal was fraught with difficulty, but Da Gama's expedition had proven the viability of the sea route. The Portuguese crown, recognizing the immense strategic value of this discovery, immediately embarked on a policy of military and commercial expansion in the Indian Ocean. They established fortified trading posts, or feitorias, at key locations and used their superior naval technology to aggressively challenge the established Arab and Indian merchants. This new Portuguese presence in the Indian Ocean, which bypassed the traditional overland routes and the Ottoman intermediaries, allowed European powers to gain direct access to the source of the world's most valuable commodities. Da Gama's journey, despite its commercial shortcomings, was a geopolitical triumph that signaled the end of the Silk Road's dominance and the beginning of a new era of global maritime empires. While the Portuguese methodically charted a course around Africa, the Spanish inadvertently created a new global network by looking westward. The discovery of the Americas, and, more specifically, the immense silver deposits found there, provided the economic engine for a trans-Pacific trade that would forever bypass the old Silk Road. This new network was a direct result of a strategic quest for an alternative path to Asia, a quest that ultimately led to the creation of a vast intercontinental commercial system. The Spanish conquest of the Aztec and Inca empires in the 16th century gave them control over the world's largest silver mines, particularly the immense Potosi mine in modern-day Bolivia. The sheer volume of this silver, transported to Spain on heavily armed galleons, was a new form of global currency. The Spanish crown, seeking to use this wealth to acquire the silks, spices, and porcelain of Asia, established a direct trade route across the Pacific. This was the famous Manila galleon trade, which linked the port of Acapulco in Mexico to Manila in the Philippines. The galleon trade was a highly regulated and systematic enterprise. The ships, built for both cargo and defense, made one round trip per year. From Acapulco, they carried silver bullion, the product of the Americasto Manila. In Manila, this silver was exchanged for a vast array of goods from China and other parts of Asia that had been brought to the city by Chinese and other merchants. These goods included not only the traditional silks and spices of the old Silk Road, but also porcelain, lacquerware, and cotton. The Chinese economy, with its immense demand for silver, was a perfect partner for the Spanish, and the flow of silver from the Americas to Asia was so significant that it had a profound impact on the economies of both continents. This new network fundamentally altered the dynamics of global commerce. It created a direct link between three continents, the Americas, Asia, and Europe, that was independent of the traditional overland routes. The immense volume and speed of this oceanic trade made the old land-based Silk Road obsolete. The overland caravans, which were slow, costly, and vulnerable, could not compete with the efficiency and scale of the galleons. Furthermore, the galleon trade had a geopolitical effect. It shifted the center of global trade from the Mediterranean and the Indian Ocean to the Atlantic and Pacific, making the Spanish and Portuguese empires the new global commercial powers. The Spanish galleon trade was therefore not a side note to the Silk Road, but its ultimate successor, creating a new, more interconnected world that had been unimaginable just a century before. The European quest for a direct maritime route to Asia was not limited to the southerly passages around Africa or across the Atlantic. As the Portuguese and Spanish empires consolidated their control over these lucrative southern routes, other European powers, particularly the English and Dutch, began to explore a different and far more perilous alternative: a northern passage through the Arctic Ocean. This search was a strategic effort to bypass the monopolies held by the Iberian powers and gain their own independent access to the riches of the East. The search for a northeast passage, which would take a ship around the northern coast of Siberia, was a recurring theme in English and Dutch exploration throughout the 16th and 17th centuries. Early English expeditions, such as those led by Hugh Willoughby and Richard Chancellor, were driven by the hope of finding a navigable sea lane that would lead them to China and India. While these voyages failed to find a continuous passage, often ending in disaster due to the treacherous ice conditions, they did open new trade routes to the north. Chancellor's expedition, for instance, accidentally established contact with the Muscovy Company, a new trading partner that opened up a lucrative trade in furs and other commodities with Russia. This demonstrated that even failed attempts at a northern passage could yield significant commercial benefits. Concurrently, a search for a northwest passage, which would lead through the Arctic archipelago of North America, was also underway. English explorers like Martin Frobisher and Henry Hudson spent years navigating the icy waters of modern-day Canada, driven by a combination of commercial ambition and a spirit of scientific inquiry. Their voyages were a testament to the immense difficulty of the task. The unforgiving Arctic climate, the impassable ice floes, and the short sailing season all conspired against them. The search for this passage was a long-term strategic game, a persistent effort to find a new route that would allow for a different type of global commerce, one that was independent of the southern routes. The relentless pursuit of these northern passages was a direct consequence of the new geopolitical realities of the 16th and 17th centuries. The Portuguese and Spanish dominance of the southern seas meant that other European nations were locked out of direct access to the Asian markets. The northern routes, however unviable they proved to be, represented a strategic and political alternative. While no continuous northern passage was found during this period, the expeditions had a profound impact on the development of cartography, shipbuilding, and navigational techniques. They expanded the known world and laid the groundwork for future scientific exploration of the Arctic, demonstrating that even a quixotic quest could have significant and lasting consequences on the course of history. The 17th and 18th centuries marked the terminal decline of the overland Silk Road as a major artery of global commerce. This was not a sudden collapse, but a gradual, definitive shift to sea-based trade, which rendered the ancient land routes economically unviable. The maritime empires of Europe, Portugal, Spain, the Netherlands, and England had, by this point, consolidated their control over oceanic trade, and their commercial practices were far more efficient than the overland system. The core of this shift was a matter of logistics and cost. Overland caravans were slow, costly, and subject to a multitude of risks, including political instability, banditry, and a complex system of tolls and taxes imposed by every regional ruler along the way. The time it took for goods to travel from China to Europe by land was measured in years, and the costs associated with transport and security were immense. In contrast, oceanic trade, while not without its own risks, was a scalable and more direct alternative. A single large ship, or galleon, could carry more goods than 1,000 camels, and at a fraction of the cost per unit. The time it took to sail from Europe to Asia, though still a matter of months, was a vast improvement over the overland journey. The rise of powerful state-backed monopolies, such as the Dutch and English East India Companies, also contributed to the decline. These corporations, with their private armies and navies, were able to enforce their own trade monopolies and protect their routes from rivals. They established a systematic and predictable system of commerce, with goods being bought and sold at fixed prices in major ports across Asia. This level of institutional support and commercial standardization was something the fragmented overland routes could no longer provide. The center of gravity for global commerce had moved to the sea, and the great cities of the Silk Road, which had for centuries been at the heart of the world's economy, now found themselves on the periphery. Furthermore, the rise of powerful isolationist states in Asia also contributed to the decline. The Ming Dynasty, and later the Qing, maintained a strict policy of limited contact with the outside world, which choked off the eastern terminus of the overland routes. The Safavid and Mughal empires in Persia and India, while open to trade, were more focused on their own internal affairs and regional conflicts, and they had no interest in maintaining a transcontinental network that was losing its economic relevance. The Silk Road did not vanish overnight. It continued to exist as a series of regional trade routes, with local communities trading with one another, but its role as a grand artery of global commerce had definitively ended. It was an era that proved that the flow of goods, like the flow of water, will always seek the path of least resistance. After centuries of decline, the land mass of Central Asia once again became a focal point of global geopolitics in the 19th century, albeit for new reasons. The region became the arena for a strategic rivalry between the two great powers of the era, the British and Russian empires. This contest for influence, known as the Great Game, was not about trade in silk or spices, but about political and territorial control. The old Silk Road, now a series of forgotten trails, became the stage for a new kind of imperial competition. The Russian Empire, expanding steadily southward from its base in Siberia, had a strategic objective to gain access to the warm water ports of the Indian Ocean. Their expansionist policy, driven by a combination of commercial ambition and a perceived civilizing mission, brought them into direct confrontation with the British Empire. The British, who had consolidated their control over India, viewed Russian expansion with immense suspicion. They saw it as a direct threat to their most valuable colonial possession and a prelude to a potential invasion of the subcontinent. The contest was not a single open war, but a long, complex period of diplomatic intrigue, espionage, and proxy conflicts. Both empires dispatched explorers, cartographers, and spies to Central Asia to gather intelligence and to gain influence with the local khanates and rulers. The British, operating from their base in India, sought to establish a series of client states in Afghanistan and Persia that would act as a buffer against Russian expansion. The Russians, in turn, worked to undermine British influence by forging alliances with local leaders and establishing trade relations that would draw Central Asia into their sphere of influence. The very act of mapping the territory was a form of political assertion, with each side racing to chart the unknown lands and assert their authority. The old cities of the Silk Road, once centers of commerce, were now strategic military and political outposts. Samarkand, Bukhara, and Khiva, once home to a vibrant community of merchants and scholars, became prizes in the imperial contest. The British and Russian agents, operating under the guise of scientific exploration or diplomatic missions, used these cities as bases for their operations. The contest was a low-intensity conflict that nonetheless had a profound impact on the local populations, who found themselves caught between two competing imperial powers. The Great Game was a dramatic final chapter for the ancient overland routes. While it did not revive the trade that had once defined them, it demonstrated the enduring strategic importance of Central Asia as a land bridge connecting East and West, a geopolitical reality that continues to influence the region to this day. The ancient Silk Road, which had been rendered obsolete by global maritime trade, was not rediscovered until centuries later, when a new generation of European archaeologists and explorers ventured into the arid lands of Central Asia. Their pioneering work, conducted in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, was driven by a combination of scientific curiosity, colonial ambition, and a quest for lost civilizations. Their excavations and surveys brought the forgotten cities of the Silk Road to light and provided the first tangible evidence of a complex and interconnected past. One of the most significant figures in this era of exploration was the British-Hungarian archaeologist Sir Aurel Stein. Over the course of 4 major expeditions, he meticulously explored the Taklamakan Desert and other regions of Central Asia. His work was not a treasure hunt, but a systematic archaeological survey. He excavated the ruins of ancient urban centers, such as Khotan and Nia, which had been buried for centuries by the shifting sands of the desert. His discoveries included not only artifacts, but also thousands of documents written on wood and paper in a variety of lost languages. These documents provided a wealth of information on the daily life, legal systems, and commercial practices of the peoples who had once lived along the route. Concurrently, a series of German expeditions, led by figures like Albert von Lecoq, explored the oases of the Tarim Basin. Their work was similarly methodical, focusing on the excavation of Buddhist cave temples and the collection of ancient murals and sculptures. Their discoveries, which included thousands of paintings and manuscripts, revealed the incredible artistic and religious fusion that had taken place along the Silk Road. The murals, in particular, provided a visual record of the diverse cultures that had once inhabited the region, from the Greco-Buddhist styles of Gandhara to the distinctly Central Asian and Chinese motifs that had been adopted and adapted over centuries. The Russian Empire also participated in this archaeological and geographical exploration. Explorers and scholars such as Nikolai Przhevalsky conducted detailed geographical surveys that mapped the remote and previously unknown lands of Central Asia. Their work, while often having a military and political objective, provided the foundational geographical knowledge that enabled later archaeological work. These early excavations and surveys were often carried out under difficult conditions, requiring immense logistical support and personal resilience. The artifacts and documents they brought back to Europe provided a tangible link to a world that had been lost to time. They confirmed that the Silk Road was not just a historical footnote, but a major artery of global exchange that had shaped the cultures and societies of Eurasia. Their work inaugurated a new era of scholarship and provided the old bones that allowed historians and archaeologists to reconstruct the story of the ancient trade routes. The Silk Road's influence extended far beyond commerce and technology, leaving an enduring legacy of cultural blending that shaped the art, music, cuisine, and languages of the peoples along its path. The continuous movement of merchants, pilgrims, and scholars created a cosmopolitan environment where different traditions met, mingled, and were transformed. This cultural synthesis was a defining characteristic of the Eurasian landmass, creating a shared heritage that transcended political and geographical boundaries. In the realm of art, the Silk Road was a dynamic channel for the exchange of styles and motifs. The Greco-Buddhist art of Gandhara, for instance, which blended Hellenistic sculptural techniques with Buddhist themes, traveled eastward to Central Asia and China. Its influence is clearly visible in the murals of the Mogao caves, where depictions of the Buddha and bodhisattvas show classical drapery and facial features. Conversely, Chinese artistic traditions, such as the use of silk as a canvas and the depiction of landscapes in a highly stylized manner, were carried westward, influencing the courtly art of Persia and Central Asia. The portable nature of goods like silk, ceramics, and metalwork made them ideal vehicles for the dissemination of these artistic ideas. Musical traditions similarly benefited from this exchange. New instruments, such as the lute, which originated in the Near East, made their way along the trade routes and were adopted into the musical traditions of China and other parts of Asia. Chinese orchestras incorporated these foreign instruments, and new musical forms and melodies were created, reflecting the multicultural influences of the Tang Dynasty. The Sogdians in particular were renowned for their musical and dancing skills, and their presence in Chinese cities introduced new forms of entertainment and performance that were highly valued by the elite. The influence of the Silk Road on cuisine was profound and lasting. The exchange of agricultural products, such as grapes, alfalfa, and pomegranates from the West to China, enriched the Chinese diet and contributed to the diversity of its agricultural base. Similarly, the Chinese originated noodles and tea made their way westward, becoming staple foods and beverages in Central Asia, Persia, and eventually Europe. The use of new spices and cooking techniques also spread along the routes, creating a new hybrid culinary tradition. Furthermore, the Silk Road had a significant impact on language. While many languages were spoken, the Sogdian language became a lingua franca for Central Asian commerce, with Sogdian scripts found in documents across the region. This was not a forced imposition, but a pragmatic choice by merchants who needed a common tongue for business. The spread of religions also introduced new languages and scripts, with Sanskrit and Pali traveling with Buddhism, and Arabic traveling with Islam, each carrying with it a new vocabulary and a new set of philosophical concepts. The legacy of the Silk Road is therefore a testament to the power of human connection, demonstrating how the simple act of trade could lead to a rich and enduring cultural synthesis that continues to define the peoples of Eurasia. The historical significance of the Silk Road is found not only in the goods it transported or the empires it shaped, but also in its representation of a fundamental human drive to connect, to explore, and to exchange. The network, in all its forms, stands as a testament to humanity's inherent curiosity and its willingness to overcome immense obstacles to engage with the unknown. The Silk Road was never a single static entity. It was a fluid and ever-changing system that proved the resilience of human enterprise in the face of political turmoil, geographical barriers, and a lack of centralized authority. The very act of traversing the Silk Road required a combination of courage, discipline, and ingenuity. Merchants and travelers had to navigate treacherous deserts and mountains, face the threat of banditry, and adapt to a multitude of different languages, laws, and currencies. The rewards were immense, but so were the risks. This high-risk, high-reward environment fostered a spirit of daring and innovation that was a hallmark of the peoples who lived along the routes. It was this spirit of enterprise, rather than the dictates of any single empire, that was the true lifeblood of the Silk Road. The Sogdians, for example, did not have a large empire to back them, but their decentralized network of trust and shared culture was a more resilient and powerful force than any military. The exchange that occurred along the Silk Road was not a one-way transfer. It was a mutual process of learning and adaptation. Western technologies, such as glassmaking and astronomical theories, were not simply adopted by the Chinese. They were studied, refined, and integrated into existing Chinese frameworks. Similarly, Chinese innovations, such as papermaking and gunpowder, were not simply copied in the West. They were re-engineered and adapted to new contexts and uses. This was an exchange of intellectual capital as much as it was of goods. The Silk Road was a great laboratory of human ingenuity, where ideas were tested, refined, and disseminated on a global scale. Furthermore, the Silk Road facilitated the transfer of philosophical and religious concepts, which had a profound impact on the cultures of Eurasia. Buddhism, Christianity, and Islam all traveled along these routes, carried by pilgrims and scholars. These new faiths, with their complex philosophical systems and ethical frameworks, had to adapt to local traditions, creating a series of hybrid religious cultures. The Silk Road was therefore a testament to the power of human connection. It was a physical manifestation of a shared impulse to reach out, to learn, and to grow. The ancient roots remind us that a connected world is a prosperous world, and that the spirit of exchange, however difficult the circumstances, is an innate part of the human condition. After a long period of decline, the ancient pathways of the Silk Road have once again become a focal point of global geopolitics and economics, this time in the context of modern trade and infrastructure. These contemporary initiatives, often referred to as the New Silk Roads or the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, represent a large-scale, state-sponsored effort to revive and reorient the land routes of Eurasia for contemporary commerce. The ambition of these projects is immense, aiming to create a new network of railways, highways, ports, and other infrastructure that would facilitate a more efficient flow of goods, people, and information across the Eurasian landmass. The primary driver of these modern initiatives is the People's Republic of China. The BRI, which was officially launched in 2013, is a multifaceted program with two main components. The Silk Road Economic Belt, which focuses on the overland routes through Central Asia, and the 21st Century Maritime Silk Road, which is a sea-based network of ports and shipping lanes. The strategic objective is to create a new framework for global connectivity that would reduce the reliance on traditional maritime routes and establish a new, powerful commercial nexus in Eurasia. This would be achieved through massive investments in infrastructure projects, from high-speed railways in Kazakhstan to ports in Pakistan and Greece. The construction of these new corridors is a complex and highly collaborative process that involves dozens of countries across Asia, Europe, and Africa. The projects are financed through a combination of state-owned banks, international development funds, and private sector investment. The focus is on creating a series of interconnected corridors that would allow for a more rapid and predictable flow of goods. For example, the new rail links connecting China to Europe have dramatically reduced the transit time for goods from several weeks by sea to just over 2 weeks by rail. This speed and efficiency make these new routes an attractive alternative for certain types of goods, particularly high-value electronics and other time-sensitive products. The new Silk Roads are more than just a matter of infrastructure. They are a geopolitical project with significant implications for global power dynamics. They are a clear signal that the centuries-old dominance of sea-based trade is being challenged by a new, more integrated vision of overland commerce. While these initiatives are in their early stages and face a multitude of economic and political challenges, their existence is a testament to the enduring strategic importance of the Eurasian landmass. The ancient pathways that once carried silk, spices, and ideas are being re-engineered for a new era of globalization, proving that the spirit of exchange that animated the old Silk Road is as relevant today as it was millennia ago. The ancient Silk Road, which was a network for the exchange of goods and ideas, has found a new modern analogue in the digital age. This contemporary version, often referred to as the Digital Silk Road, is a new and powerful network for the exchange of information, data, and digital technologies. This new network is not a physical one in the traditional sense, but a series of interconnected data centers, fiber optic cables, and telecommunications infrastructure that are once again linking the Eurasian landmass and beyond. The primary drivers of this initiative are the same as those of the new physical Silk Roads: a strategic desire to create a new, more integrated global network and to reduce reliance on existing, Western-dominated digital infrastructure. The Digital Silk Road is a multifaceted project with several key components. The first is the construction of a vast network of fiber optic cables and telecommunications infrastructure that is connecting China to Europe and Africa. These projects, often funded by Chinese state-owned enterprises, are creating a new digital backbone for Eurasia. This is a strategic move, as it gives China and its partners a greater degree of control over the flow of data and information, reducing their reliance on existing networks that are often owned and operated by American and European companies. The construction of these new networks is a complex and highly collaborative process that involves dozens of countries, each of which is seeking to modernize its own digital infrastructure. The second component of the Digital Silk Road is the exchange of digital technologies and a new global standard for telecommunications. Chinese companies, particularly those in the telecommunications and high-tech sectors, are playing a central role in this. They are building new data centers, cloud computing platforms, and other digital infrastructure in countries across Eurasia. This is creating a new global ecosystem for digital services that is independent of the existing Western-dominated one. This is a strategic move, as it allows for a new, more integrated vision of digital commerce and communication, one that is not subject to the same regulations and legal frameworks as the existing networks. The Digital Silk Road has significant implications for global power dynamics. It is a clear signal that the centuries-old dominance of Western-dominated digital infrastructure is being challenged by a new, more integrated vision of digital commerce and communication. The ancient pathways that once carried silk and spices are being re-engineered for a new era of globalization, proving that the spirit of exchange that animated the old Silk Road is as relevant today as it was millennia ago. While these initiatives are in their early stages and face a multitude of economic and political challenges, their existence is a testament to the enduring strategic importance of the Eurasian landmass.